Right, it is time for our weekly slot with the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, and there is a lot to discuss this morning. The government is set to announce an inquiry, a Commerce Commission inquiry into our banking sector today, looking at profits and fees charged. Chris Hipkins is live from Parliament. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can we start with the banking inquiry? Is any of this going to be reported back before the election?
To be clear, I'm not announcing what the market study today is going to be, but I don't anticipate that there'll be, the market studies take some time, so the fact that a market study is taking place doesn't mean that there's going to be instant overnight change or even necessarily a significant report back before the election. Okay,
so it's a ComCom market study that's coming. Is it going to, obviously no announcements before the election, but is it going to make any difference at all? You guys have done one on supermarkets, on petrol, you've whacked the landlords. I mean, has any of this made stuff cheaper for us?
What market studies do is they give you an evidence base. What you then do with that evidence base ultimately determines what happens in terms of, whether consumers end up getting a better deal. The supermarket market study, for example, provided a really good evidence base for what we could do to improve the system. So we've got a grocery regulator being established. We're working on opening up the wholesaling so that there can be more competition within that market. There are a range of different options that we can work through as a result of having the evidence base to make good informed decisions. So market studies in themselves don't solve problems that are identified, but they help to identify the problem and give an evidence base so that you can then develop the answers to some of those challenges.
Yeah. But what about the other ones that I mentioned? The petrol, when you guys went after the landlords, we've seen rents go up, we've seen petrol go up, we've seen supermarket prices go up. This 5 years after Jacinda Ardern told us we were being fleeced.
As I've indicated, they provide an evidence base. Governments can do a variety of different things to address that. So in areas around supermarket competition, we're doing quite a lot.
Yeah.
In areas around fuel competition, fuel competition, it's a challenging area. I think successive governments have looked at this and tried to identify how they could get more competition into that market, how they could, whether or not the fuel companies are making excess profits and so on. This has been an ongoing debate for my entire lifetime.
Yeah. But given that, is it worth doing another one? Because it's going to cost, I imagine, millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to do this. Is it worth our time if, as you're saying, things get too complicated? And actually, you haven't been able to name one example of where things have got cheaper because of one of your studies.
Well, it's early days. If you've got a lack of competition in a market, you don't always turn that around overnight. So in the case of supermarkets, for example, which is the most recent study where a really clear evidence base of a lack of competition was established, that's not going to turn around overnight. We're not suddenly going to have big new players everywhere over the country overnight adding more competition. But we can do things that head in that direction, opening up wholesale supply chains, for example, to allow new competitors to enter into the market. That work is underway. Having more a grocery competition watchdog put in place, which is what we're doing. So there are things that you can do as a result of these studies that do make a difference.
But haven't made a difference on anything we pay at the supermarket or at the petrol pump. Let's talk about banks, come back to banks. What advice have you had that they are making excess profits?
Well, this is one of the reasons that you would, not saying that this is what we're going to be announcing today, but one of the reasons that a market study has been considered for the banking sector is actually to provide an evidence base. A market study gives you an evidence base of whether or not the profits that are being made are reasonable profits or whether they are excessive profits. So in the case of supermarkets, we've got the results of that market study. It found that they were making, $1 million a day in excess profits. So that's over and above what you would expect to be good, successful business profit. They're making, they were at that time making even higher profits.
Yeah, but
that's an evidence base that we should do something about it.
But what is causing you to look specifically at banks as opposed to any other industry which has seen an increase in profit over the last few years? What in particular has narrowed your focus there? Or do you just not like them? Is it election year?
I get that you're trying to get me to inadvertently make an announcement this morning, which is not what I'm going to do. There'll obviously be an announcement later today on what the next market study will be.
No, I'm not.
And all of those questions, those questions about what sector has been chosen and why will be answered when that announcement gets made. But I'm not doing that now.
No, fair enough. No, I'm not trying to get you to say anything about that. I'm just trying to understand why the focus on banks and profits as opposed to any other industry. If you look at ANZ, for example, they've got $200 billion in assets. And if you look at their profitability as a return on equity, it is middle of the road for NZX companies. So if you're a company that's listed in New Zealand, should I be worried about Chris Hipkins going after my profits? How do you pick which ones you don't like and want to study on?
I think where there's evidence that there's been significant profits being made, where there could be a lack of competition, and lack of competition doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't lots of players. It means that competition's not operating as effectively as it could. Then those are the sorts of areas that we would look at for a market study.
All right, let's talk about the ethnicity criteria with wait lists for surgeries in our hospitals, particularly in Auckland. This story from the Herald yesterday. Can you give us an example of an area where this policy that's being introduced has worked?
Well, three things. One is clinical need should be the #1 priority, prioritisation criteria, and it is, and it will be, and it will continue to be. Second, evidence has been, identified that suggests that Māori, Pacific, those from rural communities and those from low-income backgrounds have been waiting longer with the same clinical need for healthcare as other New Zealanders. And then the third thing, obviously, is that is something we should do something about. People shouldn't be getting less access to healthcare because they're Māori Pacific from a rural community or from a low-income background. So what my understanding is that in Northland and I think it's in one of the Auckland DHBs, they've been looking at ways to reduce that. They've been looking at what the criteria are that they use to prioritise those who are on the wait list to make sure that they're dealing with that past discrimination. Now, I want to be clear. I've asked the Minister of Health to look at that because I don't want to see one form of historic discrimination, which there is evidence of, being replaced by another form of discrimination that means that some people end up getting healthcare that others aren't. But I do think that past discrimination does need to be addressed.
Yeah, totally. No, sorry, we completely understand the story. We're just running out of time. The question was, can you point to an example of where this type of policy has actually worked to reduce the very disparities you're describing?
Well, my understanding is that in the DHBs, where their former DHBs, so in Northland, for example, where they made changes to the policy, the wait times for Māori, Pacific, rural and low-income people on those wait lists is now more comparable to others on the wait list as a result of what they have been doing. It's not preferential, but it is more comparable to others.
Right, but somebody has to miss out somewhere, don't they? Because you haven't put more resources in. So if one group is improving, then some individuals are going to have missed out on an opportunity they otherwise would have had, no?
No. So first of all, if you've got an urgent clinical need, you will get that urgent clinical need seen to.
Yep.
What we're talking about here is people who are languishing on a wait list for a less urgent clinical need, making sure that as the DHBs, the former DHBs, work to clear that wait list, which is we've put a lot of pressure on them to be getting those wait lists down. As they do that, they want to do that equitably so that some people aren't getting preferential treatment over others. That's the overall goal here. It's to get the wait lists down, and it's to do it in a way that's fair and equitable.
Yeah, but you understand that because of the new criteria to do with ethnicity, that there would be some groups like Chinese or Indian or Middle Eastern who would have to miss out in order that Māori or Pacifica would jump the queue a bit.
So the evidence is that the opposite's happening at the moment, that Māori and Pacific people are missing out and not getting access on the same basis as the other population groups that you've just mentioned.
Yeah.
And so that isn't acceptable. We need to, ethnicity shouldn't play a role in access to healthcare. So what I've asked the Minister of Health to do is to make sure that So what I've asked the Minister of Health to do is look at what they're doing to make sure that they're not replacing one form of discrimination with another. I think them seeking to close that gap so that there isn't a discrimination built into the system, that is a right approach to take. Whether or not the mechanism that they're using to do that is right, that's something the Minister of Health will be looking at.
Let's go back to the budget, which you announced in May, and you said there would be free public transport, that there would be half-price public transport for under 25-year-olds from July 1st. We're now learning that in many parts of the country that won't happen. Will you apologise for, I don't know, false advertising?
Well, actually, in most parts of the country it will happen. It's Auckland and Wellington, the biggest cities with the biggest public transport networks, where we're still in discussions with them about how soon that can be implemented and what might happen in the meantime. So, obviously I'd love Auckland and Wellington to be able to get their act together and implement it sooner, but we'll continue to talk to them.
See, that's disparaging of Auckland and Wellington, implying that they didn't have their act together. You guys just sprung this on them. They don't have a means of checking IDs.
Well, everywhere else around the country, all of the other local governments have found ways to implement that. We'll continue to talk to Auckland and Wellington and to support them to make sure they can implement it as soon as they can.
OK, if you were a business making a claim about when somebody would be able to get something like half-price public transport, then you would probably get in trouble with the Fair Trading Act. Do you apologise for misleading people in your press releases on budget day about this? Because you didn't say we will give the money to the councils and they will make it happen. You said you will get half price from July 1st.
Well, I don't agree with your characterisation. I think almost everybody watching this will have at some point gone into a shop to buy something that's on special and then had to wait because the shop was run out of stock and they had to order in some more. But the reality here is, we've made the announcement on budget day. We're now working with the local councils to ensure that it gets implemented.
I don't know, it sounds pretty slippery to me. Sounds like you're flogging used Hondas in Hutt Valley.
No, look, I think it's a policy that New Zealanders are going to benefit from. We obviously want to make sure that we're working through any implementation details to make sure that they're actually going to benefit from it as soon as they can.
All right. Very quickly before we go, Meng Foon, he's definitely gone? Like, he's no longer, it's gone, it's over?
He resigned. His resignation has been accepted.
OK. Effective when? Like yesterday?
Well, the email that I got from him on Friday indicated that he was resigning and that it was effective from Sunday. He got a letter yesterday, Monday, from the Associate Minister accepting his resignation.
OK. All right, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins, thanks very much for your time.